You can see that since 2021, a median priced home in the US and since 2022 in the Charlottesville metro have not been affordable for median income households. So if you feel like you've been having more conversations about the lack of housing affordability or the increasing housing costs in the last 3 to 4 years in Charlottesville, it's because the pressure on home buyers in the region has worsened dramatically. The data shown on this slide looks at whether a household earning the median income for its area can afford to own a home that costs the median price for homes in that area. So if a household earns less than the median income, then owning the median price home in that area would not be affordable, regardless of whether the index indicates that an area might be affordable. So if you make a lot less than the median income, your ability to afford a home is a lot more strained. And I did want to point out that there was an abrupt drop in share of median income required to own a median priced home in the Charlottesville MSA. I had our data folks take a look at that, and they quadruple checked for errors. And the data seems to be correct based on what you can download from the Atlanta Fed. So that light blue line, as you get to the right side of the screen, drops in 2025, which could mean a couple of things. But I have a couple of other slides that counter anything that I can offer to justify how or why that would happen. So next slide. This next slide is median home sales price versus median household income versus construction costs. The Las Payres price index is an index that's calculated from a set. I'm going to get really wonky here for a minute, so bear with me. So it's a price index calculated from a set of fixed quantities of a finite list of goods. So we're assumed to know that the prices in two different periods. So the price index would be the first period, which is then serves as the base period. Then the value of the index in the second period is equal to this ratio. So the total cost of the basket of goods in period 2 divided by the total cost of exactly the same basket in period 1. So it's common to see the median home sales price navigating above and below the price index. But here we see the median sales price in the Charlottesville MSA remains below the price index. Roughly a 50% increase in income over the period of this slide, and an 84% increase in the median home price. So clearly home prices are rising at a much faster rate than income in the area. On this next slide, this is the market heat index. Zillow's market heat index is a time series that aims to capture the balance of for sale supply and demand in a given market. It relies on the listing-based metric inputs of user engagement on Zillow's active home listings, the share of listings with a price cut, and the share of for sale listings that are pending after 21 days. So what we consider is that if there's a score of 70 or above, that indicates a strong seller's market. A score from 55 to 69 would be a seller's market. If the score is between 44 and 55, that would be considered a neutral market. And a score from 28 to 44 would be a buyer's market. Anything below 27 is considered to be a strong buyer's market. So the data indicated that the Charlottesville MSA did not experience a strong buyer's market at all at any point during this time, and represented a strong seller's market in the spring of 22, 23, 24, and 25. Though you can see that over time, the market is trending towards a more neutral market. Next slide. This next slide illustrates the new homeowner and rental income needed versus the median household income for the MSA. So new homeowner income needed is an estimate of the annual household income required to spend less than 30% of monthly income on the total monthly payment after newly purchasing a typical home with a 20% down payment, which is becoming less and less of a reality for most folks. New renter income needed is the estimate of the household income required to spend less than 30% of monthly income to newly lease the typical rental. You can see that the new renter income needed falls below the median household income, but the new homeowner income needed is well above the median household income. Next slide. Okay, so this is new homeowner renter income needed versus median household income. An estimate of annual household income required to spend less than 30% of monthly income on the total monthly payment after purchasing a typical home with a 20% down payment. New renter income needed, an estimate of the household income required to spend less than 30% of monthly income to newly lease the typical rental. And the takeaway from this slide is that the thatched areas indicate census tracts where median household income is insufficient to pay for median price rental and or home. So you can see from this slide that on the renter side, there are a little less than half of the geography in the TJPDC service area that has that thatch. But on the homeowner side, you can see that the vast majority of the TJPDC service area, the median household income is insufficient to pay for the median priced rental or house. Next slide. So this slide also shows the TJPDC service area, including Louisa. You can see the renter and owner housing cost burden. So the darker the color, the greater the percentage of folks that are housing cost burdened. The lighter the color, obviously the less housing cost burdened. There are significant chunks in that 40% to 59%. There's a few areas in the service area that fall between 60 and 79%. And then there's that two areas where 80% or greater. I think this can be explained by the student population in Charlottesville, and then also those homes up around Lake Anna, which also has a very low supply of rentals in that part of the service area. Next slide. So on the left, we see the percent of total housing units that are renter occupied. The darker the color, the higher the concentration of rental units. On the right, we see the percent of renter households that spend more than 30% of their income on housing. So for the most part, there are fairly low concentrations on the left, with a few exceptions. The closer you get to the Charlottesville metro, and then as you head a little bit east, there are a few. The percent of cost burden renter households is pretty dispersed. throughout the service area, with the eastern part of the service area and the central part of the service areas having the most cost burden renter households. Next slide. So this slide shows you how much housing development or how little housing development has taken place between 2020 and 2024 in the state on the left, and then the TJPDC service area on the right. So you can see the concentrations. Deep Southwest has had very little to no housing development, housing units built since 2020 or later. You move up to Winchester and Shenandoah County, there's some higher development going on. It's sort of spattered throughout, but then when you zoom in on the right by census tract, you can see that there is some pretty significant development happening in the TJPDC service area, but there are still some of the counties that are lagging behind on the development of housing. Next slide. So this slide is multifamily housing by percentage of units in the service area. That top left, low density would be 2 to 9 units. Medium density is considered 10 to 50. High density is 50 plus. You can see mobile homes, RVs, and boats. And then bottom right, single family townhomes. So you can see the distribution of the different types of housing density throughout the region. There's significant areas particularly related to low density, medium density, and particularly high density and townhomes where there are no units of housing in those criteria. Next slide. So this is single family versus multifamily housing by percentage of units. Multifamily housing on the left, single family housing detached on the right. It's that right slide is the most striking, but it is at the same time predictable. And as I mentioned earlier, in this particular MSA, it has a higher percentage of multifamily than does the national average. But you can see how much of the census tracts are predominated by single family homes on the right. And most of the multifamily is clustered in and around Charlottesville, with a couple of exceptions in other parts of the service area. So I am going to stop there. I welcome any questions and thoughts that you all may have.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, raise your hand to speak or put it in the Q&A and we can answer it live. But yeah, I definitely learned a lot from that. I think oh, great, we have a question in the chat already. Asks, was this dip under the median income line influenced by the housing market crash? For the person who put that question, do you remember which graph you were referring to? Oh, for the price of homes versus income. Thank you.
Price of homes. Um, I think the answer to that is not the housing market crash, but actually COVID. If I'm understanding the question correctly, it is is the cost of materials causing the decline of development? So I think there have been a few things that have contributed to the decline of development. Materials is definitely an issue. Supply chain has been an issue. The tariffs have been an issue. Um, but we also have a lack of trades folks that have been slowing things down. And then there's also I'm thinking specifically about uh, interest rates have discouraged folks from developing. And then there's also related to the federal policy changes that have slowed down the flow of most of the subsidies that would go towards specifically affordable housing. It was, so I see it was the price of homes versus income. Let me go back to, there is a question here from Kim about, are we using this data for the housing study? That I can't answer, but maybe Emily can. But I did also want to say, and I saw Laura Lafayette was on here earlier. We have since 2006 in this country had only 1 year where housing development exceeded demand, and that was 2023. So every other year since 2006, we've been producing less housing than the demand for housing year over year. Which has created a situation where I am a big supporter that we need to increase the supply of housing and figure out creative ways to do that. So that is a major contributor as supply gets constrained, demand continues to rise, and the price consequently goes up as well.
Great. Yeah, I think our next question is on the availability of water and sewer and how single-family homes each need a well and septic in some of our region. And how does that type of information factor into the data, if it does?
Um, so what this factors into specifically for us is the difficulty in developing housing in rural areas. I recently spoke with my colleagues out in Colorado, and they were sharing that it can be $100,000 for a well and septic to be installed for a single home out there because of the topography and the depth of the wells and the different systems. In our parts, we do see this being an issue as well, especially as you get further west into the stranger topography. So we do factor it in. There is more investment going into infrastructure to help bring down costs. There are some pretty good models in Virginia alone. The town of Warsaw, this doesn't address the water and septic, the well and septic system, but it does address the infrastructure. Is that a place like Warsaw, which is a very small town in the Northern Neck, they waived the water and sewer hookup fees to increase development of housing, which brought down the cost. That's on average between $15,000 and $18,000 per unit. And they took a long-term view on that they would recoup that in property taxes over a series of years. But they had such a dearth of housing that they had to do something a little more dramatic. So, yeah, Emily, can I just fly through some of these?
Yeah, go for
Yeah.
it.
So have you looked at how many single family are rental, and are they renting single family by choice, or that there is not multifamily apartment style? Um, we definitely look at how many single families are rentals. Um, we don't necessarily know, are they renting single family by choice, or that there's not multifamily apartment style available. So I think, the bottom line is, when you move into an area that is high cost, and based on the data, I would say Charlottesville is a higher cost community. Uh, Unless you're moving with a higher paying job that puts you, well above the median household income, it's going to be a challenge for you to rent or buy a home. So it's going to take some time. Um, General observations. What are my general observations of the state of housing in our area versus the state? Where are we an outlier? It's an interesting question because as I travel the state and more broadly the district, we see metropolitan areas like Charlottesville, still considered a small city, but an MSA, and the college town. So obviously there's going to be more development of multifamily. Um, and then once you get further away from the center, we we hear so frequently that we want to protect our rural character, which means we don't want any more housing, or we don't want the data centers, or we don't want the whatever. But at the same time, we also hear from those folks, but we want a Home Depot or we need a grocery store. It's like the only way to get to that Home Depot and those grocery stores in those more rural areas is by having rooftops. The folks that run those entities are using calculations of rooftops to determine where they're going to site, uh, their businesses. So as far as the region versus the rest of the state, I think, the closer you get to Charlottesville, and with a few other exceptions throughout the service area, there is a pretty high commitment to developing not just housing, but a diversity of housing and housing types. But then there are also parts of the service area that are very anti-development. We see there's a great example along I-70 up in Maryland where they've created a development corridor along I-70. So that creates development close to the interstate. But then as you get farther away from the interstate and into those rural areas, they're really restricting development. So, I'm a fan of that model. I'm also a fan of creating homes at different price points and different types to accommodate folks across that spectrum or continuum of housing. When I can speak for myself. The first apartment I lived in after college, my wife would have never come and visited me because it was pretty nasty. But as I had more income and moved into a nicer place and then bought a home and bought my dream home, and at some point I may be moving back down that continuum. If that continuum doesn't exist, we create this challenge for folks that are trying to move up that continuum and don't have that option because the housing stock exists for them to accommodate them. So by having a healthy continuum of housing, we tend to have folks that can more freely move up and down that continuum based on their existing needs. But I would say overall, the service area is doing better than other parts of the state. Yeah. I see Ann put in there that well and septic costs at least 60,000 wherever Ann is located. Any other questions come to mind? I see reference in-migration percentages. What does it look like for in-state in-migration to the Charlottesville area? I think I have that in the slide. I can pull that back up. 64.5% of the folks that moved into Charlottesville's MSA moved in from some other part of the state. Any other questions, Emily, that you can see?
I see one in the chat actually of
Okay.
to what do you attribute the low number of home buyers from out of state compared to other places in Virginia?
What comes to mind for me is some of it is affordability. So if folks are looking for a job in the Charlottesville MSA, and one of the first things folks look at is affordability. So I have a job. This is the projected salary. What can I afford? As a calculus, is it going to put me in a better or worse situation than I currently am? And I think what that 5.4% tells you is they frequently say no. It does not put me in a better situation than I'm currently in. So they opt not to move to the Charlottesville area. It could also speak to the amount of transience in a community. So Washington, D.C. is incredibly transient. Charlottesville's tenure, which I don't have in here, it would be interesting to see how long folks stay in their homes in Charlottesville versus other parts of the state. If I had to guess, they stay there a pretty long time and may even retire there, which adds to the lack of turnover in the housing stock.
Great. We have another question in the chat. Can you discuss what role discretionary zoning approvals and excessively long site plan and subdivision plat review periods have on affordability?
Discretionary approvals and excessively long site. That sounds like a loaded question to me. How about you, Emily?
A little bit.
Um, yeah, anytime that we have extended processes, unnecessary barriers, it's going to do two things: increase the cost and also um, discourage folks from going down that road. So what we like to tell people is when I travel throughout the state, the jurisdictions that make it easiest for developers tend to have plenty of developers. And the areas that make it really difficult for folks tend to struggle to recruit developers to those areas. So I don't know if that necessarily answers the question, but I hope so.
Great. We also have a question in here on Fred housing data. Mike says that working on the local level, it can be hard to generate accurate data around units and permits. And he's curious where Fred gets this and other data.
Yeah, so at the state level, this is an interesting question. We track this in our district and also across the country. And what I'll share about Virginia is that since the first quarter of 2018, since the first quarter of 2018, North and South Carolina both have issued more housing permits on a monthly basis than the state of Virginia. So they are just issuing permits on a much more rapid pace that's outpacing Virginia. And Virginia needs to figure out how to address that issue. Because if we have, and this happens, we have developers that are, straddling the border, the southern border of Virginia, if they can just access, if they can get permits issued much faster in North Carolina, which is the case, then they tend to migrate south of the border into North Carolina. The development around Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, particularly east of Raleigh, uh, it's so high, the amount of housing units that are being developed. Now, granted, it's flat and it's much easier to develop.
We have a question on recognizing some underbuilding relative to demand since 2006. Have we worked through overbuilding from the years before that, 2000 to 2005?
Have we worked through it? I'm not, yeah, I'm probably stepping out of my lane on this one, but I'm gonna say not really. Not really. We not only did we overbuild a number of units, but we also overbuilt the size of the units. So if we look at the size of units that folks were living in the 1970s, 1950s, 1970s, 2005, 2020, the houses just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger unnecessarily, in my opinion. This is, again, my opinion, not that of the Fed. Um, so, we're working through that. And that speaks to that issue of the continuum of housing. We just had a bunch of these McMansions in these developments that are much bigger than folks need. Uh, but without the lack of stock across this continuum of condos and townhouses and multifamily and smaller single family starter homes, folks are kind of stuck in those bigger homes even though they don't need them. So we have more unused bedrooms in this country now than we've ever had.
Right, we have, I think, we have a few more questions actually. Um, so Lori Jean asks if you have theories about why home sale prices may have changed more quickly here than the national level, referring to the graph that had a steep drop only in our area.
Um, my theory when I first saw this was this is wrong. The data can't, this can't be the data. Like, I don't understand. So when the data folks went back and looked at this 4 times and they came back to me and said, no, this is right. My next conclusion was, I can't believe that the Charlottesville housing market has cooled that much that quickly. Which, when you look at some of these other graphs, it hasn't cooled that much that quickly. So I don't really have an explanation um, for why we have such a dip. I have a feeling that the data is going to be corrected at some point, and it may have dropped some, but it's really hard to believe that the Charlottesville MSA's share of income needed to own a median price home has dropped so far back closer to the 30% threshold, from 43% to 31% in 1 year. It's really hard to believe.
That makes sense. All right, we have a question from Michael about with the baby boom generation aging, what is the expected influence of that on the housing market?
Um, I'd love to say that it's going to free up a lot of single family starter homes for folks to move into when they want to enter into home ownership for the first time. But without the stock of housing across that continuum, I don't, there's a lot of folks I think in Charlottesville, you're going to be a little bit better off than some places because you do have a higher share of multifamily. Uh, but I was out in Allegheny County. There are no options. So not only baby boomers, but um, the greatest generation, the World War II folks, they are stuck in these single family homes because they don't have any other options. And many of them are multi-level. So it's an issue that's got to get fixed. Now, the wealth transfer, the great wealth transfer that's expected to happen over the next 20 years, I think we may see some pretty creative solutions to folks addressing this. Um, there's a great example out of Harrisonburg about a teacher that inherited some money and decided that he wanted to address housing instability, and him and his wife ended up investing in the development of 24 homes, single family homes, some of them duplexes, for families of the kids that he was teaching that were experiencing housing instability. And, it wasn't like he took a loss. He invested and ended up getting 2 or 3% return on his investment. But, the social impact of that investment for him and his wife was enough for them to feel like they're making a dent. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I can to addressing this issue. But I can tell you that the baby boomers are going to struggle. We see some models around the country of matchmaking where folks that need housing are being paired up with baby boomers that live in these homes, and they're renting bedrooms or guest houses, whatever the case is. I see something at the bottom there, Emily. Private sales that don't have to be reported, more common for higher priced homes. So private sales, there still has to be a deed transfer. So there would be some documentation for the transfer of ownership of a home.
Um, I think we also have a few more questions just to keep track of time. We have about 5 minutes left. Um, right. So what could the Fed do to encourage the production of smaller homes, especially two-bedroom units or less?
Yeah, the Fed, as in the Federal Reserve System or the Federal Reserve banks, can't do a whole lot. Now, the federal government can do a lot more. Um, we do really need more two-bedroom units, and yeah, the overbuilt supply of McMansions. Um, and local zoning can also play a role in this. So, we see, and even some of the jurisdictions in the TJPDC service area have minimum lot sizes. Um, there are ways around that. So you could use, if you built 4 2-bedroom units or even 2 2-bedroom units, you could do that on the same lot size where the minimum lot requirement for a single family home is whatever square footage. So there's you could do that at the local level. You could do it at the federal level with certain financial offerings for folks, uh, whether it's Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac.
We have a question from Candace about referencing that since people are purchasing homes at a later age, what are your thoughts on the idea of a starter home when it takes so much time for someone to get started? Will people have enough income to kind of move through that continuum?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason that folks are buying homes so late is because the stock of housing is so low. So if we increase the stock, then in theory, people will be able to purchase at an earlier age, especially if we can decrease the size of some of these starter homes back down to, 12 to 1600 square feet. Um, that would go a long way. I see Margaret's question of which would you say comes first, economic development or housing? Um, it really depends. It depends on the area. I was out in Wythe County. They had a housing deficit. They did a housing study. They had a housing deficit of like 600 units. This is a rural area with a housing deficit of 600 units. And then they announced that an employer is coming in and they're going to hire 600 people. And the question is, where are these folks going to live? Like, are you drawing folks from 90 miles away now to come work at this place? So the answer is it depends. I think if you have housing, you can do economic development a lot more easily. If you have economic development, then it should, in theory, be easier to recruit housing developers. Um, but I do think that you need to have some influence over the types of housing that are being developed. They go hand in hand for sure.
Yeah, and I think that is a good place to end off for today. Thank you so much for putting together all of this data about our region and for answering. We had some tough questions today, but yeah, for everyone in the audience, we will have a survey that will pop up when we close out this meeting, and we will also send out the recording over the next couple of days. So look out for that. But thank you so much. All right,
Thanks.
bye.
Bye bye.